Hey, how you doing? So today and for this week and next week we're going to be talking about African art. And so I wanted to start the discussion by showing you a few things and thinking about just exactly how is it that we can think about African art. Now, when most people have in their minds some image of African art, they have images of the kinds of things like this. For example, this is a little thing I picked up in Kenya. It's a soapstone sculpture. Unpainted, unadorned. As you can see, it's kind of an image of a person, very stylized, very abstract, and it's quite polished, and there's a lot of soapstone around Kenya. This is called Kisii stone because it's made in a place called Kisii. You have things similar to it. This is a wooden sculpture, and you can see that this has faces on the various kind of pieces of the wood here, and it's really meant to signify ancestors, and so this is kind of just the history of a people. Again, purchased in a well, in this case, in a North American shop, but very much the sort of thing you could get in a tourist market in most parts of Africa. So you have things like that. You have a lot of representational things as well. This is a representation of a baobab tree, and it's made from banana leaves. And you can get these very easily around tourist markets as well. The branches are made from wire, and so they're just wrapped with wire, and you can hang things on it or whatever if you want. There's a lot of what you might think of as recycled items as well, and so something like this. It's a little metal sculpture of a guy who really doesn't look much like he's playing an African instrument. He looks more like a guitar god, and I think that's actually probably what he's supposed to be doing here. It's an image that is meant to kind of amuse the tourists, and you know, the name of the game is selling, and so this is something that sells. Obviously, I have one, so there you go. It works. We often associate with African art a lot of sort of, I guess, utilitarian objects, and so you know, you have things like this. It's a bowl. It's made out of made from a gourd. You can see it's been burnt out on the inside to kind of seal everything, and then it's got some you know, decorative kind of wire work and solder and bead work on the outside of it. You have other things like this. This was from South Africa originally, and it's just basically wire and beads, and again, just your basic bowl. All of this, I mean, this I got at a shop, or not a shop, but a tourist market in Cape Town. So you have all of those sorts of things. We often also look at things that, you know, signify what people think about when they think of Africa. And so here's a good example of that. A little mug, a little wooden mug, with a giraffe for a handle. Okay, you can find this sort of stuff all over the place in the tourist markets in Africa. And so when people often think about African art, they often think about something like tourist art. Here's one of my favorite items of that sort, and it's an ebony carving of a Coke bottle. And when I saw this in Nairobi market, I thought, this is great. I just love this. Because, and the reason I liked it so much is that everything else in that shop was an ebony carving of an elephant or a lion or all sorts of things that, frankly, most Africans wouldn't even see on a day-to-day basis, or even hardly ever. Some of them had never seen big game at all, in fact. But this you would see every day, right? I mean, Coke is big in Kenya. And so it just seemed to me very appropriate to be carving something that was actually part of day-to-day experience, and not necessarily meant to go for the tourist market, although I bet the tourists bought this as well. So all of this raises the question of what counts as African art. I mean, clearly the stuff that I've shown you here is on the edge of arts and crafts, and but it raises the question of how we even approach the question of African art. We traditionally have done that in a very different manner than we've done with Western art. I mean, if I was to ask most people for examples of African art, they'd start with exactly the kinds of things I've just shown you now. They'd start with masks. There's one behind me over there. They'd start with carvings. They'd maybe start with garments or clothes of various sorts. They'd start with paintings of village life, celebrations, the normal kind of very simple sort of stuff like that that people often associate with Africa. Now think about this list that I've just given you of things that people would think about. We have things that have utilitarian or ceremonial value, masks, stools, gourds used for carrying milk that are particularly beautiful. We have items representing traditional life, either through what we surmise their use would be or through direct representation. In other words, what we call art in Africa often has a kind of anthropological edge to it. It's often seen as a way into understanding African existence, African life. And if you think about it, we don't usually think about art in the West that way. I mean, we don't look at a Rembrandt painting to look about, to learn about life in 17th century Amsterdam. Some people do for academic reasons, but most of us look at a Rembrandt painting because there's something about the painting itself that's beautiful or intriguing or artistically, valuable in some way. We look at them for different reasons in the West, or so it seems, than we do in Africa. We tend to treat art in the West as an object in its own right, whereas we have often treated art in Africa as a means to an end, usually the end of understanding something about the people who made it or the people who valued it. There's another reason, there's another difference with the ways we tend to approach art in Africa and in the West. In the West, we learn about the artistic tradition to which a work belongs. We say something is Mannerist, or it's pre-Raphaelite, or it's Impressionist, or it's Cubist, or something like that. That tells us about the technique that the artist used, and it puts that artist in relation to other artists who use similar materials and techniques and so forth. Well, how about Africa? I mean, we don't really do that very much. I mean, there are some artistic traditions. There's, for example, Tinga Tinga painting in Tanzania. There are any number of kind of local traditions in various places, often based on different kinds of materials that people can get. But people tend to associate African art not with traditions, but with a country or a culture. And that's quite an important difference. There's a third difference. At least for traditional African art, we tend not to care much about the individual who produced the piece. I mean, most of the things that I showed you here, I have no idea who made them. And neither did the person who sold them to me. We tend to think of art in Africa as the property of a culture rather than of an individual. And you can't imagine, really, in the West, for example, seeing a painting and not wanting to know who made that, what was their story, why did they paint that or sculpt that or whatever the way they did. There's a fourth difference. A great deal of African art has been produced in the context of providing work for people outside of Africa. That was true during colonial times, when colonizers wanted bits of work to show, the exotic places they'd been to. And it's still true in the tourist market. I mean, all of the stuff I just showed you is really oriented towards tourists. And that's not an illegitimate activity. I mean, that keeps a lot of African artists going. I mean, you have to work. You have to, find a way to make money to survive. And, there's a market there and they're doing it. What's interesting, though, is how much it draws on the, if you wish, the romantic senses of what Africa should be. There are lots of carved animals, lots of stools, lots of masks, lots of traditional cloths and garments. Everything we look at through that ethnographic lens that I mentioned earlier. So given all of this, the question really is, how do we really look at African art? I mean, how can we approach it and not simply think of it in terms of a window to a culture produced anonymously by somebody who is doing it for either ceremonial or ritual reasons or for a tourist market? I mean, what does it mean for art to be art in Africa? That's what we're going to be looking at for the next couple of weeks.